Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you can take your seats, please. Okay, well, I hope you had a good morning. I guess this is probably going to be the shortest session of the whole conference, Innovation in Finished Vehicle Logistics. So this session is about innovation, but not just for innovation's sake. We want to find the right solutions, practical solutions, things that will really help to move this industry forward. So once again, been very fortunate in attracting some great people to this panel to give different ideas from car makers, from associations, and 3 innovators to share some of their thoughts. But once again, it's your session, so any ideas, comments, thoughts, please present them to us at the end of the session when we make it into the Q&A and the panel discussion. They've already thrown me off this panel, it seems, so I'm going to have to sit away from the table. They've even taken my nameplate and kind of just tossed it aside. But you'll be pleased to know I will be back towards the end of the session for the Q&A. So the first speaker of the day, I'd like to welcome to the podium Steve Tripp, Head of Worldwide Vehicle Transportation for Chrysler. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Louis. Thank you, Louis. It's always great to be here. I have to start with a confession, though. When Scott Naz did his personality test, I was one of the people that raised my hand for Z, and I think his term for that was degenerate. I'm not sure. So, but my perspective is, so be it. If that's what I am, I embrace the term. So first of all, innovation. So when I think of innovation, I think of this guy. Anybody know who this is? And if you guessed Muddy Waters, you would be wrong. So this is a very famous economist, born in Austria, spent a lot of his career in the United States. It's Joseph Schumpeter. Does anybody know what Joseph Schumpeter, what his most famous idea was, or his most famous concept was? Schumpeter was famous for the concept of creative destruction. When I think about innovation, I think creative destruction is a great term. And the definition of creative destruction was the process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. I think it's the heart of capitalism. I think it's the heart of the American economy, the concept of creative destruction. Think about things like cell phones. Every one of us here has a cell phone in our pocket. It wasn't that long ago, if you wanted to make a phone call at something like this, you went to a phone booth. When's the last time anybody went to a phone booth? How many of us don't even have landlines in our homes anymore? That's creative destruction. Record stores. Anybody remember record stores? I mean, if you wanted to buy an album or music, you went to a store. Some of us bought 8-track tapes. Some of us bought cassettes, vinyl, whatever it was. Nowadays, I don't even know where there is a record store in my town. You buy all your music online. Maybe you don't even buy music. Maybe you listen to Pandora. Creative destruction. So creative destruction revolutionizes the economic structure. That's what capitalism is, and that's what capitalism is all about. So how might creative destruction apply to our industry? Well, first of all, I think the biggest problem that the industry is facing today is a systemic shortage of rail cars. We haven't talked about it a lot at this conference, but it's real significant. It's what I've said this many times to many people when they ask me how I'm doing. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning. It's the last thing I think about when I go to bed at night. And it's what I think about most of the rest of the day in between. It's a serious, serious problem that's impacting our ability to deliver vehicles to our customers. And I think this problem is seasonal at least. I mean, we deal with it every year in the February, March, April timeframe. This year, that timeframe has been extended dramatically. It happens other times of the year as well. So I say that it's seasonal at the very, very least, and it's looking to many like it could be a permanent condition. Now, velocity solves this problem. I mean, if we can make the rail cars go faster, it solves a lot of problems. I mean, that's one of the issues, is that the rail cars aren't turning fast enough. And I have challenged the industry, the rail industry, at many times in this conference and other similar conferences to move faster, to make the rail cars move dramatically faster. I'm not talking about shaving tenths of a day off or increments of a day off. I'm talking about a dramatic restructuring of the rail industry that could dramatically speed up rail car movement, reduce cycle time, effectively increase the size of the fleet. But that hasn't happened to date, and maybe for good reason. I'm not an expert in the rail industry. The people in the rail guys know much more about their business than I do. Maybe what I'm proposing really isn't possible. Maybe that's the case. But when I'm faced with a problem, I think about creative destruction, and I think about, well, what's a change, or is this makes me think about industrial mutation. Does this lead us to an economic structure that is ripe for, in the words of Schumpeter, industrial mutation? And the question is rail the only method to move a lot of vehicles long distance? Now, we heard this morning from Toyota, from Brian, that that they're stretching it out. It used to be 200 to 300 miles. Now they're going to 500 miles. But he said, 1,000 or 1,800 miles. I can't remember the exact numbers. 1,200 miles. We think that's too long for rail and can't work or won't work. All right, maybe. Let's talk about that. So what I'm here to propose today is a new model, a different way of thinking about how to move vehicles long distance. So let me take you through the specifics. From Detroit to LA, it's about 2,300 miles. And I'm going to use Detroit. I'm going to talk about Detroit, but it could be Tennessee, it could be South Carolina, it could be Alabama. I mean, it could be any place in the center part of the country where people build rail cars and they want to move them to California. So Detroit to LA, 2,300 miles. If you break that up, it breaks up into 4 segments of about 600 miles each, or 8 segments of about 300 miles each. In my opinion, this is perfect for a series of relay points about 300 miles apart, and the concept is this. Truck driver gets up in the morning, drives his truck 300 miles west, a loaded truck, loaded full of finished vehicles, drives it 300 miles west, and he hands it off like a baton to somebody who's ready for it at the other end, who's brought him his empty truck, by the way, coming the other way. They do that exchange. The driver, the next driver takes it 300 miles, hands it to the next driver. 300 miles, hands it to the next driver. And the loaded truck moves across the country in 2 days. And it's kind of like the old Pony Express. I mean, you may remember the Pony Express from your, I don't know, probably junior high school or high school days, when the Pony Express was a method where, for a while, we moved mail and small packages from the Midwest to the West Coast in 10 days on a horse. So I'm taking 10 days on rail cars to get my vehicles to the West Coast. We used to deliver on a horse in 10 days to the West Coast, using this concept, basically. So, is it a little bit crazy? Well, maybe, but let's talk about it. So again, here's the concept broken down in 8 segments, 300 miles each. Takes about 5 hours to drive each segment. 8 segments, that's 40 hours. With the handoffs in exchange, that's 2 days. So that's how we get to a 2-day transit time. It could also be 4 600-mile segments. Maybe that works better. It might work better to have a guy drive all day, stop, hand it off to another driver. That driver takes it. That could be a better model, or it could be some hybrid of the two. There might be segments where it's good to go 300 miles. It could be segments that it's good to go 600 miles. You can kind of mix and match, and that's going to be one of the themes of this whole thing, is that you can kind of mix or match this whole thing. It's kind of like if you were a kid, you had Tinker Toys. You can build a lot of different things with this basic concept. So what are some of the advantages of this new idea? So first and foremost, and pretty significantly, it's a 2-day transit versus 10 today. I mean, that is incredible customer satisfaction. We heard from Brian that he was talking about how his dealers are much happier getting vehicles delivered in a couple days when it used to take 6 or 8. Imagine the satisfaction you would get out of a change like this. The next point I'm going to make is maybe the most important of the whole program. We also heard this morning from several people. Kathleen, in particular, was talking about drivers, because you might say to yourself, where the hell are you going to get all the drivers to do this? Don't you know there's a haul-away driver shortage, and it takes a year and a half or 2 years to make a haul-away driver. So this is a big problem, a serious barrier. But the beauty of this thing is that the drivers in this network, they're not haul-away drivers. There's no load or unload for almost everybody in this network, maybe everybody in the network if you want to do it that way. The driver gets up in the morning, gets in a loaded truck, drives 5 hours west, stops, has lunch, meets his empty coming the other way, drives back home 5 hours, goes to sleep in his own bed that night. There are 3 million truck drivers in America. There may not be a lot of car haulers, but there are 3 million people with truck driver's licenses in this country. There's a big pool of people to drive these trucks. And as I said, with the 300-mile segment idea, these guys are home every night. So if you got a home every night job where you don't have to load or unload a truck or even bump a dock, I mean, we talked about bumping docks a lot easier than loading and unloading the haul-away trucks. Bumping docks isn't necessarily always fun either. You don't even have to bump a dock. You get up in the morning, you drive 5 hours west, you have lunch, you drive 5 hours east, you go sleep in your own bed. It's a great job. And my view is that this yields a lot more modest pay. I'm not talking about trying to pay people minimum wage for a truck driver job, but what I am saying is that you can find people to do this kind of work, I think, for a lot less money than you can find them to be a haul-away driver in Midtown Manhattan. So the relay points for this idea, where you do these hands-off, you don't have to build a terminal, you don't have to build a pad, you don't have to build anything. I mean, my view is you do it at truck stops. I mean, right where the guys are sitting there having lunch, waiting for the other guy to show up, that's where you do the exchange. The vehicles aren't sitting around. I mean, if they're moving, they're moving. That's the whole point. So it gets better. So, first of all, I've been talking exclusively about loads one way, empties all the way back. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's definitely a lot of backhaul opportunities. There are a lot of imports still coming into the West Coast that need to get to places like Chicago, Toledo, Cleveland, or for plants in the Southeast that need to get to Atlanta or Jacksonville. So there's, I think, a significant backhaul opportunity here for this move. And then when you start to build something like this, more opportunities come up, you know. So is this feasible or not? I think fuel will be a big part of the expense of this program, but you know, now you've got a dedicated fleet doing something kind of unique. Is this an opportunity for CNG or LNG to cut fuel costs? I don't know, maybe. Again, when you design something for a specific fleet, maybe it works. So here's another idea. Convertible trucks. We've been talking at this conference for quite a while about convertible trucks, trying to find a home for them. Could this be one? You'll haul automobiles to the West Coast. How many containers come into LA and Long Beach or some other West Coast port every day that need to move to the interior of the country? They could be moving on a convertible trailer. Vehicles west, containers east. So the next one's maybe a little bit on the far down the road, but you know, I'm a firm believer that there will be self-driving vehicles in this country someday. You know, I think in cars we're seeing it first. It's only a matter of time. Maybe it's more than 5 years. I don't know. But someday there will be self-driving vehicles in this thing, and I think that will include trucks. So that's a little bit further down the road, but that's something to think about. How about other innovations? For fuel economy, again, once you build a dedicated fleet for something like this, you may find better ways to improve the fuel economy on the trucks that we don't necessarily do for haul-away trucks today. But once you start doing something like this, you may find it efficient to make modifications to get another half a mile per gallon out of a truck by making a change. Load factors, same thing. You know, once we design a fleet for this specific purpose, can you find some clever ways to dramatically improve the fuel economy that you get? So, and believe it or not, more ideas too. So a couple of other advantages. Number one, this is important, it's highly scalable. You could start this thing with 4 trucks and 8 drivers. So you don't need to go out whole hog and, you know, invest millions and millions of dollars. You have 4 trucks and 8 drivers, you could put one of these strings in place and let it go. And it's very flexible. You know, obviously the trucks can be redeployed. I mean, if you try it running through to the southwest, and that doesn't turn out to be effective, you try it to the northwest. You know, you can try a lot of different options with this thing until you find the right one that works, if you need to. And the relay points that I talked about, they're highly flexible. You know, again, if you're just using truck stops, they can be any place. You can even change them on the fly. So, for example, if you've got a guy going west and he's delayed for some reason, he's running behind schedule. He's probably got the cell phone of the guy he's meeting on the other end. He calls him up and says, "Hey, I'm 20 minutes behind schedule." His partner says, "No problem. I'll just drive 20 miles further east today, and I'll meet you in X instead of Y." And the handoff happens there. So it's extremely flexible. It's extremely scalable. So it's something that you could really get going quickly without a lot of investment and without a lot of risk. Now, okay, so maybe that's kind of radical for you, but you don't have to go all the way. You can step it back a notch. Another idea would be you could rail it to Kansas City. If you don't want to go all the way across country and truck, that's too big a bite, that's too big a leap. You could rail it as far as Kansas City in unit trains just for that purpose that run in a very tight loop from your plant to Kansas City and back. Real quick, real fast transit, excellent utilization of rail cars, quick turnaround, off we go. And then once you're in Kansas City, you can truck from there to LA. It's a day and a half. Denver, it's half a day or one day driving, 600 miles. Dallas, 500 miles, half a day. Or you could truck it to Kansas City, but in any event, Kansas City could become a hub. So this is kind of what that looks like. So you go from Detroit, and you could substitute. You could take out Detroit, and you could put Alabama. You could put Tennessee. You could put any number of other places in there for the origin. You rail it or truck it to Kansas City. Once there you do need a big facility, perhaps. But from there, you can go to Denver. You can go to LA. You can go to Dallas and other places too, I'm sure. So once you start thinking about this in modules and these legs, again, it's kind of like Tinker Toys, and it's very flexible and it's very scalable. All kinds of possibilities are possible. You can think of a lot of different things, a lot of different angles, a lot of different ways to do it. So today, I think that I've proposed a pretty radical change in the way we distribute vehicles, but I want to make one point here that I think I'm serious about this. I think this deserves a serious look. I mean, I've looked at some of the numbers, and this isn't just a pie-in-the-sky theoretical. I think this has real potential, and I would encourage everybody in this room to look closely at this too. So to close, I have one more photo quiz for you. So this is going to be a little bit easier than Joseph Schumpeter. I think a few of you might recognize this guy. So does anybody know who this is? Who is it? Bob Dylan. Very good. So one of Bob Dylan's most famous songs was "The Times They Are A-Changing." And from my perspective, that if Joseph Schumpeter and Bob Dylan agree that change is inevitable, well, who am I to argue? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. And that's very much the kind of thing we want to encourage in the discussions, in the sessions, And just when you're away from the conference is trying to look at the things that we do in a completely different way. So I think that was a very interesting presentation there from Steve. And if it makes you feel any better, Steve, you didn't have to raise your hand and say you were a Z. We all kind of knew that anyway, but... So that's probably the last time you'll see Steve at one of my conferences after that. So. Next up, to give us some good thoughts, just keeping up the thing of insulting our speakers. It's not my twin brother. I'd like to welcome to the stage Bill Schroeder, General Manager of the Auto Haulers Association of America. Bill.
Thank you. All right, front and back. All right. If you allow me a moment, I want to ask Steve a question on your presentation, which was very interesting and very creative. But I do want to know, is the rail shortage really the last thing you think about at night?
I'm afraid it is.
You know what? That makes me feel so much better about my life. All right. Innovation, but not for innovation's sake. That's the topic today. And I thought about what innovation is and Googled and Binged and did all that other kind of stuff. And here's what I came up with. Well, let me get with this first. A method to the madness. What I'll be talking about is thoughts on innovation, AHA and innovation. AHA is the Auto Haulers Association of America. And suggestions that I have regarding the industry and innovation. One of the things to keep in mind is that I am currently the general manager of the association, but maybe after this talk I will not be anymore, so bear with me. What is innovation? And again, as I mentioned, I thought about it and went and researched it and all that, and it would have been easy to say. And as it turns out, I don't have a clue exactly what innovation is, but I have a lot of experience in setting up environments that allow for innovation. And I'll talk about some of them in a moment. Here's what it's not, which is always an easy thing to say. It's not desperation. And let me just give you an example of some of the things that I think are a bit of desperation. Those of us who are going to implement ePod because Chrysler is mandating it, I think are prone to missing the opportunities and the benefits of doing ePod, because we'll be rushing to do something and not really reflecting on what it really means and can mean to our business. So innovation is not desperation. Some of the ingredients of innovation, and this is just talking about, I did consulting for many years, and I was always the guy to come, the outside guy to come in and try to help people move along and be a change agent and all that. So there's certain ingredients that I've observed over the years. You've got to have a topic. You can't just sit in a room and say, all right, let's all stand around here and innovate, or sit around and innovate. You've got to have a topic that is real, that is valuable, that is important, and that you can stay focused on. Because focus in innovation is an extremely important part of the whole ingredient. Next thing you have to have is talent. You've got to have subject matter experts, and not all from the same area. They've got to be from almost competing areas within the organization to be able to look at it. And it's kind of interesting in that we spend so much of our careers trying to become subject matter experts, and we try, that's our meal ticket. To some extent, as you get on a team to innovate, even though you're a subject matter expert and that's why you're brought in, you've got to kind of leave that at the door a bit, because you've got to be open and willing to listen and learn from the other people who view the same topic but from a different angle. You've got to have time. And that's just a big problem with almost any project or any innovation. It's not part of our mainstream. We're all busy, we're all that, but it has to be set aside. It has to be all the time. And many of you probably know this, and when you look at it, you say, well, this is fairly intuitive. But I think sometimes when we try to do things, we forget about the blocking and tackling of how to get from point A to point B. We've got to have trust. And you get these 5 or 6 people in a room, they all have different comp plans. They all have different key performance indicators. That has to be understood, or they're going to be threatened, and they're not going to be open to innovation. And then lastly, you've got to have Tonto. And Tonto is there just because I wanted to stay with the T theme. But what you really need is a catalyst or a facilitator. And because I was never smart enough to be a subject matter expert, that's kind of what I did throughout my consulting career. So that's just some topics on environmental things for leading to, or allowing for innovation. Now, I'm switching to innovation as it happened and some of the struggles we've had within our association, establishing it. We established ourselves 22 months ago. And then 23 months ago, we spoke at our first finished vehicle logistics conference in Detroit. But it's very interesting when you look at these core values. And these were laid out and people read them and they signed up to them. I'll let you read them. I figure you guys can read better than I can, so. You see mutual trust, very sine qua non of an association of innovation. One of the things I concluded as we were moving along in doing this is that these people are innovators, and they're also entrepreneurs. You know, almost all of our members are entrepreneurs, and they're also innovators, or they would not have tried to do this organization, this association, because we're not trying to be lobbyists. We're not trying to be discounters. We're trying to get together and help people run their businesses better. And that's a kind of an innovative idea for these people to come up with. And it was also risky in their part to say to this guy, Bill Schroeder, would you help us run it? So I thought, these guys are really innovative. And then after we talked at the first finished vehicle logistics meeting, we went to the Detroit Athletic Club for a wonderful dinner. And a gentleman who I'd never met sat down next to me. And I was really on a high because my presentation was over. And he said, you know, you're probably not going to succeed. And I said, what? Thank you very much. What? Why do you say that? So we had a brief discussion. And then he said, what kinds of things are you going to do? I said, well, one of the things that's really obvious to me is a driver training manual. You know, teach them how to prepare for work, do their work, trip inspections, you know, load the vehicle, unload the vehicle, where to park it, all that kind of stuff. He said, they're not going to let you do that. I said, there can't be that many ways of doing it. You know, I was probably a little naive, but I was also very optimistic. And he said, no, they're not going to. They think that everything they have and do is proprietary. And this is the guy he knows the industry pretty well. And so I thought, nah, he's wrong, I'm right. And so we took off. And getting back to the ingredients, when I looked at some of our starts and false starts, I never got copies of anyone's training manual. I asked, and then finally I got one, and I was told you can't share that with anyone. And I thought, I've got a lot of work to do here, or the gentleman will be right, and we will fail. So we looked at it. Well, good topic, good talent, time. We didn't trust each other, and that is a huge, huge problem, not just in our silo of the carriers, but it's a huge problem across this industry. It's probably, and this isn't a criticism, this is one of our great strengths, it's probably the most competitive bunch of people I've ever been around in my life. Very, very difficult environment and trust. And now what happened over time is, and I spoke to this, it's kind of sad, but I do mark our existence through FVL meetings, which I don't think says much about me. But last summer we talked, and this is something that I put a lot of thought into, about we see ourselves as highly differentiated under tremendous regulatory constraints, common practices and results are small. And that's true, you know, we are highly regulated. But the fact of the matter is, perhaps, I shouldn't say the fact, but perhaps to our customers, we're not as differentiated as we like to think. But we still compete on all these things. So I think a big challenge for the carriers in particular is to pick your spots. Compete on those things that matter to the customer. Other things like that, commoditize them. We talk about sometimes we feel that we're treated like commodities. Well, that's an indicative statement. But what we need to do, I think, as well, is to commoditize things that can be commoditized. A driver training manual, a driver training school, things of that nature. And again, this is something we put up last June. Keep simple things simple and compete like mad where there's a market value differentiation. That's really the crux. That's what these guys are going to be looking for. They want to see some differentiation that's important to them. They don't really care that there's similarities or differentiation in the driver training manual. They just want good results. Now, so what we did over time is we started off with vanilla ice cream. And this was life in our silo, the Auto Haulers Association. We started off with things that were not controversial and had a lot of commonality. Affordable Care Act, financing environment, safety and insurance, DOT, and highway inspections. We had a state trooper come in and say, all right, now that we've done the hours of service, here's what we're looking for. And here's how we're doing it, and here's how we're interpreting things. So we did all those things. We had Bob Farrell come down and talk about the ACC focus. So we've done a lot of things. Now, if you go over to the right-hand side and you go towards the bottom, we've now got a fairly solid draft of a loading manual. We began to trust each other. And now we're working in driver retention, and one of our more entrepreneurial companies, out of necessity and out of being entrepreneurial, has worked with a driver training school, and we are doing that down in Florida now, and that's going to be a big deal. And the reason we could do that is, in my opinion, our members trusted each other to go out there on that ledge, and it's working. Now, suggestions for the industry. Find common value propositions to establish consistency of process and technology. I think ePod's a great example. Start simple within a silo. I think, again, the ePod was a great thing. We bounded it by, you pick up the cars, you deliver the cars. So we kept it within the car carrier silo. What do we have to do next? We've got to take it outside that silo. And this is, of course, an AIAG plug. They did a great job in setting the environment for us to do this. But what we need now is to move outside the silo and things like this and work with rail and work with dealers and work with the OEMs to work with the dealers, as Kathleen mentioned earlier. Engage a chain, engage the logistics chain beyond the traditional players. There's players who aren't in this room who are part of this whole process who need to, I think, be more engaged in its part. We talked about remarketing, part of the industry, and we talked about dealers and some of the initiatives that have happened there. We've got to continue. But first, and this might just be a Bill Schroeder, we need to bring the OEMs, carriers, rail, and other key suppliers together, not as a bid and purchasing function, but as kind of a one-off. We need to listen and learn to help solve each other's top three. Everybody in this room know what their top three problems are at any moment in time? Anybody know? I mean, obviously, we know he falls asleep thinking about his, but these are important questions, and I think there's a great opportunity now for us to get together, to merge some of these silos, to talk across the silos, and to help understand each other's top three, and to move and do some things. But we're all busy. We're all so darn busy. And I'll leave you with this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill, for setting out a framework, how we have to think before we can start working on innovation. A couple of important points there. Trust is probably, in my mind, something that holds up a lot of development in vehicle logistics, in logistics in general, in automotive logistics in general. That's a very important point there. And I'd like to congratulate AHA and the other associations, ATA and IAG, on the work that they're doing to try and encourage more innovation. Next up, having been fed a line by Steve in his presentation, I'd like to welcome to the podium Bill Pollock, the CEO of CTM Worldwide.
Thanks, Louis. I'd like to thank everybody for coming here today, giving me the privilege to speak to you all. I really enjoy coming to these conferences and learning about the industry, the various facets of it. Just a little background on myself. Bill Pollock, I own the company Convertible Trailer Manufacturing, and I started my own transport company a few years back in Canada. I'm originally from the fire service, and I spent 25 years there and recently retired as a captain on the fire department, so I have a very different perspective on things. During my time there, though, I started my own transport company, of course, and I had the opportunity to learn about an entirely different industry which I knew nothing about. And of course, we were forced, of course, to learn very quickly or go out of business. So the topic is innovation. And I'm here because of that. I believe very strongly in innovation. I'm going to start out trying to define or identify what is innovation. And I'm not going to say I don't have a clue, but I'm going to say that maybe we can put some meat on this topic. Novelty is something new. That's not innovation. Creation is something new and valuable. Perhaps a trinket that's maybe marketable. Invention is something new, having potential value through utility, another level. Innovation is something new and uniquely useful. So something that you can marketize, something that you can actually use in an industry or use for yourself or whatever. So that's on that basis that I'm going forward with what I'm doing, of course. The convertible trailer concept. I believe it's an innovation. I made money with it. There was many levels to the development of it. It goes way beyond thinking that you can just build a piece of equipment and a different configuration and suddenly you're going to make money with it. It's not the case at all. It's understanding the rest of the industry, of course. And therefore, innovation has gone to levels I never ever expected, never thought, but all very challenging. I love the auto industry. I think it's a very exciting industry, and I would like to assist in changing it, making it more efficient, like I was able to with my little company. Little company of 20 trucks. I was able to reduce empty miles from 37% down to 2%. And a profitable company, of course, is a healthy company, and it can be of value to somebody else. I have a hard time believing that we can't scale this concept. Seems inconceivable to me. The only way of finding the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible, or what's perceived to be the impossible. I just want to leave you with that thought. So what's holding back innovation from my perspective? This letter is from Bob Farrell from the ACC. He indicated that the empty capacity or empty mileage in the auto transport sector is about 42%. And even though some of you in this room may not have 42% empty miles, you may be slightly better, there is still, regardless, a very significant number of empty miles. I'm just trying to create a new tool, add to the toolbox of solutions. Everybody's innovating all the time. Creative destruction, very good. I never heard that before. That's very cool. So where are we now in 2014? I use this slide to I guess, provide perspective on where we started as human beings and where we are today, human evolution. We actually evolved, and there's an upward trajectory in that development, or so we think maybe. The evolution of auto logistics. I refer to this as going out full, coming back empty. Outbound automobile hauling is going out full, coming back empty. And if you have something coming back, I'm going to load up. But we refer to it as turn and burn, turn and burn, turn and burn. Why would we continue doing that? There's no individual in this room that would just return a truck empty if there was something available right there, right then. And that's what we have to focus on. But the tools have never been available to actually change the way that we do business. That's my belief. So the failings of auto logistics, the waste in road, rail, and ocean, lots of empty miles. We know that. Our estimates put this at $50 billion a year on empty miles. That's around the world, by the way. Everybody knows there's empty miles waste billions. They create many new problems. We've lost our slides. There we go. We've lost a slide. At the top of the iceberg, of course, is the empty miles. That's what we see immediately. And therefore, we immediately assume that that's it, that those empty miles are what cost us. And I think there's many, many other factors as well below what's visible. The fuel wastage, the limitations. I've heard a bunch of things here at this conference already that are all mentioned in these below the water level, below the visible view of all of us. Environmental impact, of course. We're losing slides here. I'm sorry, guys. So we estimate the actual loss in the industry worldwide, in the auto logistics industry worldwide, is $75 billion a year. That's a very significant number. So where are we going? I'd like to congratulate Michael Riggs and his team, Jack Cooper, for taking part in this project now. After the unfortunate incident with the previous group that they've acquired, our project was somewhat put on hold. But now Jack Cooper is participating in this project, and we're going to give this a good chance. We hope that we have something that's new, that's innovative. So I want to congratulate Jack Cooper for their part in this. We suggest let's close the loop. We have just a little animation here. Doesn't appear that that's working, but basically this is just a truck going out with a load of vehicles and coming back, perhaps with parts coming back, or perhaps just general freight. Don't run empty. This is what the convertible trailer looks like. They're outside. You guys can go visit them. Of course, I know that it's very hot out there, but come on out anyhow. It could mean a new level of profitability for your company. These are a bunch of examples, and some of them we have done. Some of these are theoretical. This is a mini container or auto box that we're developing presently, but we believe this can all work. These are just different configurations of our equipment. Containers, why can't we haul containers? If that truck is running empty, why aren't we putting something on it? And because containers, of course, there's many, many, many of them, why can't we make them available quickly? So you go from your drop point, you go directly to your pickup point, have an arrangement with your shipper. The auto transportation industry, in my observation, resembles a courier company. You guys go from the busiest centers on earth every day to the next busiest centers on earth. You're delivering product very quickly, very efficiently. I was in the business. We got commended for our level of service. We were there all the time. All the shippers, as soon as they knew that I was coming by, they had loads for our trucks because of the service level. You don't have to discount your backhauls. You can treat that as a backhaul, or sorry, as a head haul because of the service level. Just more visual images of the possibilities. I want you guys to think outside the box. Hardware solutions. So convertible trailer is one of our ideas, and then we have another additional level to this because we believe that, yeah, we can use a flat deck truck after we convert our auto carrier from an auto carrier down to a flat deck truck. Well, what do we do? What do we use it for? And to make it more useful, perhaps hauling dry goods is an option. So maybe containers, Maybe mini containers that can be taken line side right in the plant. Why can't we do that? And I'm sure I could hear many reasons why not in today's situation, in today's operational processes. But why can't we change those processes? Creative destruction. Thank you, Steve. By the way, thank you very much for that plug there earlier. We've lost another slide. Anyhow, this is the Autobox, and it's a mini container, smaller container, collapsible. And basically, it is designed that we can haul smaller portions, perhaps, of inbound product or just general freight. Something that can mount onto our decks when they're converted and still carry dry product. And while we're developing it, we want to give it all the latest technological possibilities. Versatility, that's what's important. And we're having some technical difficulties. This is another animation of our Autobox. It's just simply being loaded with 2 pallets and then closed up and then loaded onto a truck. Very simple. And we want to keep it simple. We're not sure, but we're having some technical difficulties. We talked about silos earlier, automotive inbound and automotive outbound, and then general freight. And presently, inbound and outbound automotive logistics departments don't work with each other. But I challenge that, and I say they haven't had the tools to collaborate, to cooperate. I think it's possible. Given these new tools, I think that there's a fighting chance for this. General dry goods. Why can't we integrate the rest of the freight industry with automotive outbound? We need better equipment, that's what I believe. And not saying today's equipment isn't good, it's very good, but we haven't focused on other possibilities. We'll talk a little bit about legislation because we do have a legislative barrier at this point. Here we talk about an automobile transporter that restricts it. The tractor portion of a Stinger car carrier presently can haul automobiles only. Trailer can haul automobiles and it can haul general freight, but the tractor cannot. And we think this is accidental legislation, actually. But it is what it is, and the verbiage is in place, and we can't change it. Therefore, it's got to go through Congress and be approved. So we do have a converted tractor can haul automobiles, but it can also haul truck campers. And I don't know the history on that, why that came about. I suspect that whoever was on that committee at that time had a business and they hauled truck campers. So, and the amended wording is simply we want to add any other commodity that the combination was designed to transport in addition to motor vehicles. Because the truck really doesn't care what it hauls. So here's some examples. These are important. We've missed a couple of slides here again, but I just want to demonstrate to you what is legal, what is not. Right now, previous slides were all automobiles on our convertible trailer, that's legal. And then shipping, say, a vehicle on the tractor portion, that is legal. And freight on the trailer, that's legal. An empty tractor with a load of freight on the trailer, of course, is legal too. A truck camper on the tractor, it's legal. And then this load is illegal. Freight, other than a truck camper, is illegal. It just doesn't make any sense. That is the reality of today's legislation. So can we close the gap on this? I think we can, but we need industry support, of course. And that means everybody here. Everybody. It touches everybody, we believe. We want to turn this not into turn and burn, but turn and earn. Why not? Fill up both directions. These are the losses that the industry sees. $250 million a day during my presentation, about $3 million. $1.4 billion a week and $75 billion a year. That's about $10 for every human being on earth. It's a measurable amount. It's a significant amount. I'd like to participate in reducing this somehow, putting that money back into the industry. That's our perspective on innovation and auto logistics, and I'm committed to making our idea work, but I need your help. We all need each other's help. But help me help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Again, a real innovation, something that's thought through, a lot of interest, but perhaps part of the discussion later on can be about why innovation is sometimes restricted by whether it's governments or whether it's by our own industry. Next up, I'd like to welcome to the podium Scott Conover, Automotive Industrial Segment Leader for GT Nexus. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Scott Conover. I'm Automotive Segment Leader for GT Nexus, as Louis had described. And really what I want to talk with you guys about today is the topic of innovation. But more importantly, probably many people in this audience may not really be familiar with GT Nexus. Most of you guys know us on the containerized side, but we're also on the finished vehicle logistics side. And just for those of you who don't know us, what we specialize in is enabling automotive makers to have better visibility and control, across their global supply chain. And the interesting thing about that is that we really help companies to really innovate their processes, as well as transform how they're operating with their customers, their dealers, their suppliers, within their own assembly plants, as well as with their logistics partners. And on the surface, that probably sounds like many of the people that you might be working with today. But really, GT Nexus took a very much of a different approach in how we went about in tackling that problem, because back in 1999, we really began to develop a community. And that community actually consists of a lot of the people in this room. Consists of ocean carriers, container, as well as ro-ro, truck carriers, some call haulers, rail providers, and 7 of the top 10 freight forwarders. And so, as you can imagine, with having all these people operating on our platform, there's a significant amount of wealth of information and data that we have. And what I want to share with you today is really around where we see areas of opportunity for innovation within finished vehicle logistics. So and I wasn't able to be here yesterday, but a lot of what I'm hearing today is really focused on the domestic market. And so what I want to talk about is a slightly different perspective in where innovation can really occur. Because with the growth of emerging markets, automotive makers are certainly transforming, how they're operating. They're looking to operate more as a global business, less as a multinational type business. And there's plenty of evidence in the marketplace to back this up. You look at Ford with the One Ford plan. You look from a supplier perspective, Lear and the Lear One plan, and so forth. Whether companies have been public about talking about this or not, this is a long-term strategic initiative that companies will be undertaking over the next 10 years. When I look at, let me back up. One of the interesting things around this is and the primary driver around this is around, today we see more and more cross-border as well as intercontinental vehicle movements than we've ever seen before. And it's projected to increase significantly over the next 10 years. And really, to be able to fulfill this vision, automotive makers are really going to have to be looking at standardizing global data as well as processes on a global basis. And where we see today is that companies are actually ill-prepared to be able to do that, because what we're seeing is that companies are looking at taking their traditional systems that they've been using for the last 20 years, that were really designed to tackle a totally different purpose. Primarily, they were designed to tackle North American purposes. They're not designed to really tackle the global complexity of a global supply chain. And so the other effect that we want to talk about is the Amazon effect. I think everybody in here has probably bought things online and things of that nature. Well, when we go into a dealership and begin to buy vehicles, No longer is the reply, well, it'll be here in 2 to 4 weeks, is going to be sufficient. And as we look at this as a problem, there's many companies that are wanting to really have more, I'll say just more dynamic ETAs and things of that nature within the marketplace. And what we're seeing is, as a result of that, track and trace is no longer going to be sufficient. Consumers are going to be asking more and more. They're more demanding. They're having higher expectations, and they're wanting automotive makers and their dealers to be able to help them to understand exactly when that shipment's going to arrive. And if something changes, when is that? What does that change, and what does that impact on that delivery date? I don't know if you guys have seen that in your own personal lives, but I have, to where I've actually shown up at the dealership and I didn't get any notification whatsoever. And so the track and trace systems that automotive makers are leveraging today are no longer going to be sufficient, especially if we look at this on a global basis, because complexity is increasing. What we're seeing, and it's not increasing just because cars are traveling a much greater distance, it's increasing because there's a significant amount of more partners that are involved in the movement of those vehicles. And what we're seeing is that, what we need to be doing is really being able to put changes and disruptions into context with orders, shipments, vehicles, commitment dates, so on and so forth. And that's really an area where we see that companies should be looking to get better upon, because as you push out these North American systems, it's not being very effective, and it's really missing the mark. And as you go into these emerging marketplaces, it's going to have a hit on your brand and possibly your market share into those markets. And the primary culprit, what we're finding is data quality. Data quality is a huge challenge, and what we're seeing, and the reason why is because all of the automotive OEMs are really taking this as a one-off approach, meaning that you're one voice you're just really one voice talking to the carriers and everybody else about what is going on in improving data quality. And as I mentioned, we took a different approach with a community-based approach, and data quality is something that we've actually been very focused on in helping organizations to address. Because we have everybody on the same platform and operating, we were able to significantly improve this. We did a study in 2007 and measured the data quality on our platform. It was right around 65%. When we reevaluated it 4 years later, after driving change and innovation through the carrier networks, we saw an improvement of up to 90%. And so what that means, if you were on the platform over this duration period of time, if you did absolutely nothing, you would have seen about a 30% improvement in data quality. Now, we don't suggest that you get on the platform and do absolutely nothing, but I think the point made here is that the community effect is very important into how you go about in doing this. And many of our customers look at this community effect and look at GT Nexus as really the LinkedIn or the Facebook of the supply chain. And so the example that I want to give you guys here today is Caterpillar. And Caterpillar, it might be outside of automotive OEMs, but the interesting piece here is that they've actually experienced all those different things. Operating as a global company, changing how we do that, the Amazon effect. In fact, how they started their journey was because of the Amazon effect. Their dealers got together and connected with the CEO of Caterpillar and said, why is it that my daughter can order a book on Amazon, track it all the way down to our doorstep, but I'm ordering millions of dollars of vehicles and parts from you guys, and you can't tell me, some of which can be seen from outer space, and you can't tell me the exact status of it is, or if a change is going to happen, what is that change? And how is that going to impact my customers and things of that like that? They went to traditional providers, looked to some of the companies that you guys may be using here today, as well as they even tried to build something internally. And they continually found that they were missing the mark. They finally came to GT Nexus, and we were able to really help this. We have about 12,000 of their dealers on our platform. But the main thing is that it's not just about dynamic ETAs and improving the confidence of the dealerships. It's now that they have this platform and they have good quality data, they're actually able to squeeze out a significant amount of inefficiencies within their supply chain and look for areas of opportunity, look for areas of innovation, and those types of things. I can't share with you some of the numbers on the outbound side, but what I can share with you on the inbound side is that they are actually able to save over $400 million by really being able to improve The flow, 250 of it was inventory savings, and about 150 was in transportation saving costs. And so as I close, I just want to kind of give some final thoughts into innovation. The main thing is constructive vision. If your group is not pushing you, if your organization is not pushing you to really think globally, then you need to be able to begin to really do that on yourself and take that ownership. The go-it-alone approach to data quality is no longer going to be sufficient. You need to be working as a community, joining a company like GT Nexus, or actually developing your own community within the automotive ranks. And the main thing, and you guys can read the rest of these, but the one thing that I really want to hit upon here is measuring globally and aligning compensation on a global basis. What I see is that so many times the automotive OEMs are so regional in how they're being measured that their thought when it comes to intercontinental shipments is that their responsibility stops at the port of origin, when in fact the commitment for the entire company is all the way to the dealership and to the consumer. And so really need to begin to aligning how we're measuring internally and really compensating compensating the individuals responsible for that. And then the last thing is really making structural changes. Once you're able to have all this information, it's really going to enable you guys to really look at where are there areas of opportunity, where is there opportunities for innovation. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott, on reminding us that we need to have a global viewpoint as well, as we're looking at whether it's innovation, whether it's just our basic finished vehicle logistics. It's about having a global perspective now, and we've had a couple of sessions over in the conference, and we're also working on our new Import-Export North America conference, where we're going to be looking at North American vehicle logistics as very much part of a global supply chain. So I think I'm an example of being innovative and taking technology, using technology to its maximum, because those of you who have seen me walking up and down the stage will have seen that I'm very technological now with my iPad and stuff, and small bits of paper and big bits of paper as well that I carry with me. So I'd like to think of myself as someone who's using all modes of information collection to make me more efficient. So now it's time for the kind of, actually before I go to the Q&A, we've got someone who's often participated in our innovation sessions with some good ideas. So I'll just introduce the final panel member, Tom Swenas, the VP of Strategic Planning and Administration for ITL Systems. Just for any comments, any remarks that you want to contribute to the discussion so far.
Obviously, some great comments and some specific ideas on innovation, as well as some kind of the broader topic of what innovation is. And so, just a couple. For those who aren't familiar, ICL, we provide basically solutions for a number of automakers in the room, help them provide visibility, dynamic ETA, and as well as in some cases invoice audit support and so forth. For about 4.8 million vehicles last year, about 33% of the U.S. market. So we see a lot of different manufacturers and deal with a lot of different vendors. And so we have kind of a unique perspective on what's going on, and we get exposed to a lot of great ideas, not only here, but with the supply base as well as our customers. And so just kind of some general thoughts on innovation. I guess I've been lucky in my career in that I've either worked for bosses who have encouraged innovative thinking and risk-taking, or in the case of ICL, actually working for an organization where that's actually a core value and something that's very important. And so that obviously encouraging innovation really starts at the organizational level. It's something that it comes with a risk of failure. If you're going to innovate and try something new, you have to accept the flip side of that, which is that it may not work out. However, failure is obviously the forge of true innovation going forward. So I think we've all seen that in our own lives or experienced that firsthand. And I think it's an important point to reiterate. Finished vehicle logistics, as we've talked about it before during this conference and others, where innovation is actually kind of something that it doesn't come easy to the industry. And I think there's a number of reasons why that is. It's certainly not from a lack of ideas. There's great ideas from all corners of the room, all corners of the industry. Our problem is implementing those ideas. And I think what happens, we're in an industry where we're entrusted with, a very valuable commodity, and the safe delivery of that commodity will have has a direct impact on the financial health of the companies that we work for. And so taking a lot of risks with that is probably something that, most of us would be loath to do, and certainly organizations you work for, are going to be very, want to have a very careful approach to that sort of thing. Of course, the companies themselves, sometimes, the structure, policies can stifle innovation, and that's, it's good to have policies in place and have directions, but sometimes those become so onerous that, what's the incentive for a manager to take risks, to try something new, and so, there has to be kind of a balance there. One thing we see a lot of times is, there's great ideas, but there's no clear plan on how to implement it. And if you don't have a clear plan and objective, you can throw money at all kinds of stuff. We've walked into customers where they have, 24 different systems, and nobody really knows what any of them do, but it all seemed like a good idea at the time, right? So, if you don't have kind of objective what you want to do and where you want to be and have a business case built for it, then it's, the greatest ideas in the world probably are going to, crash on the shoals of reality. And I think another thing is obviously complacency. A lot of times it's, you've got a lot on your plate. Bill had mentioned this, not enough time or whatever the case may be. And so, it kind of develops this culture of good enough, and why take a risk? In some cases, innovations can expose flaws in the process or the organization. And maybe you really don't want your senior managers to know that the way you were doing it all these years and you're telling them you're great wasn't as great as you thought it was. And so there's a risk there. And I think it's a general human reaction to try to avoid situations like that. In terms of where innovation is needed, I think there's some great examples of process innovation. I think really in this industry, looking at the processes is probably where we have some of the biggest bang for the buck. Certainly there's some great examples today. Steve talking about kind of a new way of looking at long distance transport. And of course that came up too in Brian Mason's comments. Some of the other things operationally that OEMs are trying, day of week deliveries, the longer runs, better flow through at origins. I think Kathleen had mentioned this, the fact you got drivers wandering up and down load lines looking for cars. How much time is wasted doing that? Where it'd be much more efficient to have those vehicles in a way, or pre-bait in a way that minimizes that kind of time at terminal. And then, I think on the OEM side, obviously there's things to be done there. I bought a car for my wife recently, and it was amazing as we're trying to find the right model. The dealer didn't have any of the cars that we wanted. It had to be dealer traded from someone. And talking to Ernie Moore at dinner last night, you reminded me just how many cars are dealer traded, and that kind of, to me, kind of points up that there may be a problem in the way vehicles are allocated and distributed. And it's kind of been, it gets papered over with the dealer trade process, which uses a lot of gas and consumes a lot of time. And certainly consistency. We talk a lot about operational consistency and our customers. That's kind of a big focus area too. And meanwhile, we have an allocation process that's still defined by peaks and valleys, and is basically antithesis of trying to run a consistent and smooth operation. And that's another topic, obviously, as long as I've been in this business, which is 25 years or whatever now, has always been one of the beefs of the supplier base, is that you guys can't give us the cars in a consistent manner, and that's true. We still can't. So the final, kind of my final idea on the where innovation is needed, and I think this is an easy one, is ePod. And it's amazing at how much resistance has actually kind of developed to that. And it seems like it's a paperless system. It gives visibility to the cars. I would think you'd think it would be a win, a win for everyone, and yet you get a little dealer resistance. A lot of times, the first impulse on the OEM side, and then I'm calling it one specifically, is but the dealers don't like it, so I'm not going to push this anymore. And I think sometimes on the finished vehicle side, we got to do a better job of salesmanship with our sales, with our senior management. Again, Ernie reminded me of a story last night, and I had a similar experience when I worked for Brand X. Is sometimes the guys that you work for, maybe they're marketing or sales guys, they have a very short attention span. And so you may need to go in there with your idea about 24-hour deliveries or EPOD and be able to distill it in 3 bullet points and get out of there in 3 minutes. Otherwise, if we love details, you try to get too far into detail, you're probably going to lose them. So that's just something to think about. So. That's it, Louis. Those were my thoughts.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen of the panel. So now it's your turn to ask questions, make comments, share ideas, any issues you've had with trying to get new ideas implemented, and so on. We've only got a few minutes, so I'd like to throw it open first to the panel. Not to the panel, actually, to the audience.
My name is Scott Grell. I'm with American Honda. I want to thank Steve for your willingness to bring a new idea to the group, and I also want to applaud and salute your sense of the ironic. What technology replaced the Pony Express?
The telegraph.
And who was carrying the mail? That would be very ironic, so we appreciate that.
Hey, I just had a comment for Steve Tripp. I learned something very important today. I learned it's impossible to create a standing ovation from the back of the room. I was the only one standing, and you deserve that.
Thank you. And it's a fair point of, the fact that Steve has come up with an idea, because Steve's the one who might not have come up with the idea, but the fact that Steve was the one who put his, went out on the EPOD and say, right, this is something we want to do. A lot of people talked about it being a good idea. It's something we should look at, perhaps talked about the problems. But it takes people like Steve who are actually prepared to say, you know what, I'm actually going to give it a go. I'm not going to think about it any longer. I'm not going to wait till someone else does it. I think it's to Steve's great credit. They just said, sounds like a good idea, sounds like it's viable. I'm sure a lot of research went into it as well, but then decided to give it a go. And I think it's very important that car makers, logistics companies are prepared to do that. Listen to an idea, think it might be a bit different, might be unusual, might be something completely new, but decide, take that risk and actually try to implement it. So I do think Steve deserves a lot of credit for that. But a question from over there. Thank you.
A comment. Louis, Linda Brandel with Union Pacific. First, a confession. Steve is not the only person who goes to bed at night thinking about rail car supply. So confession there. Second thing, I am a triangle at heart. I love Z's and I have some Z tendencies, but at the end of the day, right, I like to take the data, I like to analyze it, think about it strategically and figure out where we can go. But I love the Z inputs for new ideas. Always been a proponent of throw things on the table. There are all kinds of different ways to look at things and see how you might be able to take something from that, try something new, do something differently, right? So in thinking about that and thinking about the relay concept, right, and as I was sitting here thinking about what that means from a rail perspective, many of those concepts, crew districts, right, and minimizing nights away from home and using, right, minimizing deadheading is what we call it in the rail industry. How do you relay that? Mixing center concepts, redundant routing, right? All of those are concepts that have been used in rail for a while. This particular situation where we find ourselves in the first part of the year where we had a winter, and it was alluded to last night that, a difficult cold winter is very hard on a rail network. So there are all the things you think about, like snow and human factor inputs, where you have people working in an outdoor factory out, looking at a train in 40 below zero weather in the middle of the night, all those kinds of things. But one thing in a 50-year type weather event that we had this year that you don't think about is the impact on the braking systems of a train. There are air braking systems. When you have extended cold like that for 2 months, you basically cut your capacity in half, okay? So if you think about any kind of transport, right, whatever it is, whether it's vessel, whether it's truck, whether it's rail, your basic function of the capacity that's required to handle it is two things. What's the demand input and what's the cycle time input, right? So there are a lot of other factors, but those are the two basic components of this. So rail found ourselves in a situation this year where the demand component, particularly on the bi-level fleet, was at 120% of what it was when it was forecasted at the time you are planning for the capacity. Not the 2-week forecast that Brian Mason referred to earlier on. That's the tactical, how do you get resources in the right place. But from a demand planning perspective, right, automotive bi-level demand is at 120% of what it was originally anticipated. Put that on top of other industries where rail functions as a network. Other industries also have some significant demand patterns that are impacting multiple roads in different ways, right? But the cycle time component with the weather event that we had for an extended period of 2 months, right, is certainly significant. And the cycle time component has to be back in, and in order to make up, has to be better, right? So lots of the things that Steve is talking about in terms of redundant routes, how do you find different routes, how do you find different combinations of truck rail, right? We're trying to employ all of those kinds of things, and I appreciate the thinking around different ideas, because that's what it takes to move your way through this, right? Just one thing to think about, right, as you think about a different mode, is I don't know if anybody from the other modes would say they could sustain a 2-month period where the demand not only didn't decrease, it increased at a time when you could only load your trucks half full or your vessels half full, right, could sustain that. And you have to look at that and say, do you think that's long term? Do you think that'll happen again? Certainly there's seasonality, absolutely, right? So you think fundamentally about what's the core base load and what's the surge, and how do you put surge around a disaster recovery event or a seasonal event? And that's something that all of us in this room should be thinking about, a better mix and a better plan for. What do you do when that happens to any mode? And how do you put the proper economic structure around what you're willing to do, what can be sustained, and how that works? So, we've had a couple of days conference. We've had some comments about rail. Felt compelled to put at least some comments on the table, and I'm speaking for Union Pacific, not for my peers. So I don't know if the other railroads have any other comments, but I would like that to be contemplated as part of any kind of long-term discussion about where the industry is, and I didn't want to leave that unsaid before we left today.
Thank you very much, Linda, and I think it is important that you gave a perspective from the rail side, so I think we all appreciate that. So I don't know if there's any comments from that, or it's a statement rather than a question, I think. So, okay, thank you, Linda. Any other statements, questions, comments from the floor? On this side, please.
Kenny Hulshoff from Polsinelli. I know this is the North American conference, but I'm curious, and to my friend Bill Pollock, world traveler, and I know you've tried to introduce the same concept abroad. Does the European Union or folks in Europe, are they equally resistant, or you talked about the silos, or do they embrace this concept a little more quickly, or just your thoughts about what's happening in Europe with your concept?
Thanks, Kenny, for the question. So Europe, I've been working recently in Europe last several years learning about the marketplace, and We've secured a joint venture partnership in Europe with a manufacturer there, and I've done a lot of research with the transportation department as well throughout the European Union, and they do not have any of this so-called accidental legislation, that they actually embrace the idea. So from a theoretical perspective, they're not going to resist it whatsoever. So the next stage now is to introduce the product into the European market, and we have prototypes now that are going to be released at the end of June, and then we invite all of the customers, from OEMs to transport companies, logistics company, anybody in the industry can come see this equipment. And then following that, then we proceed with pilot projects. So we are getting, it appears, better traction in Europe, much less resistance, and truly the major roadblock here in North America is just silly legislation. That's what I call it. However silly as it may be, it is what it is, and we have to go through due process, but European experience so far has been much better.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Okay, you only have to look at me to know that lunch is very important to me, so I'm quite prepared to end the session there. I'd like to thank the panel again for once again a very interesting session. Thank you very much. Please join us for lunch. You might want your sunglasses with you as well, and maybe some sun hats or something. And please join us for the final session after lunch, Crossfire, which will have a senior panel to talk about what we've discussed over the last 2 days, anything we've missed, and to look at a high level at the future of finished vehicle logistics. Thank you.